Franklin is a student who receives special education. Frank's IEP notes that Frank does not react well to confrontation. The IEP recommends that teachers avoid confrontational situations with Frank.
Okay, class, let's get started. Frank, I'm tired of you coming to my class whenever you feel like it. It's your responsibility to get here on time, and if you can't get here on time, you're gonna face detention. Frank, go take your seat.
Dan, are you okay? What happened here?
I gotta get to the nurse. My shoulder's killing me.
Do you need help?
Nah, I can get there myself. Can you stay with my class?
Of course. Go ahead.
And that's when he pushed me so hard I fell. My shoulder's still killing me.
Dan, are you familiar with Frank's IEP? He's classified, you know.
No, I didn't review his IEP.
According to school policy, as you know, assault on a teacher means automatic suspension. Depending upon the circumstances, it can even mean expulsion. Frank, I just talked to Mr. Hartigan. He told me what happened in the classroom. You'll be spending the rest of the day here with me, and tomorrow I want to meet with you and your parents. Frank, I believe what occurred constitutes an assault upon Mr. Hartigan. In that case, you'll be suspended. You might even be expelled.
You can go shove it. Hartigan had no business embarrassing me in front of the class like that. Yeah, I pushed him, but I didn't mean to hurt him. I couldn't take him blocking me in the doorway like that. He was in my face.
Mrs. Lynn, I've reviewed Frank's IEP. Irrespective of his classification, Frank's behavior is unacceptable. I recommend a long-term suspension, 15 days. Frank will be entitled to home instruction while he's suspended. That will be arranged by Friday.
Mr. Hartigan should not have confronted Frank the way he did. He should not have embarrassed him like that, and he certainly should not have stood in front of him at the doorway. If Mr. Hartigan had shown any sensitivity to Frank's classification, this incident would have been avoided. This suspension is unwarranted. I want you to know we plan to contest it. The child study team recommended that the IEP be available for all of Frank's teachers to review. You admitted on the phone that Mr. Hartigan had not reviewed the IEP.
Well, that may be true. While I was investigating the incident with Mr. Hartigan, I learned about a prior incident involving Frank. A week ago, Frank got into a loud shouting match with Mrs. Goodall, the teacher on lunch duty. Frank cut in front of all the students in the lunch line. Mrs. Goodall heard some commotion and came over to investigate. When she heard that Frank was cutting in line, she yelled at him. She demanded that he explain why he considered himself more important than the other students who were waiting in line. Frank cursed at her, threw his lunch tray to the floor, and ran out of the lunchroom. Mrs. Goodall didn't report this incident to me. She didn't feel it was necessary at the time, since she was eventually able to calm Frank down, and no one was hurt.
May I ask how much Mrs. Goodall knew about Frank? Had she read Frank's IEP?
Mrs. Goodall had no idea that Frank was classified. She certainly hadn't read his IEP.
I think I've heard enough. My husband and I are going to have to take legal action.
The video you have just watched illustrates the tension that can occur between the rights of students with disabilities and the extent to which schools can discipline those students if they injure others seriously. The scenario also shows what can happen to staff members when criminal charges are filed against them for assault of a student. In the video, a math teacher and one of his students got into a confrontation that turned physical. The student had an individualized education program, or IEP. The IEP spelled out the educational services and supports that the school was to provide to the student. Among other things, the IEP noted that the student does not react well to confrontation. Special education law requires that every student's IEP be accessible to each regular education teacher, special education teacher, and various service providers. The Board of Education must inform each teacher and service provider of his or her specific responsibilities relating to implementing the student's IEP and the specific accommodations, modifications, and support to be provided for the student in accordance with the IEP. School districts have a further duty to identify that subset of special education students who have major behavioral issues and provide necessary information to all staff in order to protect the health and safety of students with disabilities and all other students. For example, if a student with disabilities does not handle confrontational situations well, which was the case in this scenario, it is critical that a school district provides sufficient information to staff so they know how to avoid confrontational situations. This means that key staff such as teachers on lunch duty, school bus drivers, and staff supervising playgrounds may need some information regarding the special education students who have major behavioral issues. Furthermore, the school district must maintain documentation that the teachers and providers have been informed of their specific responsibilities related to implementing the IEP. Another issue in the video is whether the student with a disability should be disciplined for shoving the teacher. In general, public school students can be suspended immediately for physically assaulting a teacher. A child with a disability may be given certain forms of discipline in the same manner as non-disabled children are given for the same behavior. A child with a disability who violates a student code of conduct may be removed from the educational setting to an interim alternative educational setting or suspended for up to 10 school days if such discipline is given to non-disabled children. When the student who assaults someone in school has an IEP, any proposed suspension of more than 10 days requires an additional step. The IEP team and the parent must determine whether or not the student's behavior was a manifestation of the student's disability and whether or not the conduct was the direct result of the district's failure to implement the IEP. If the behavior was caused by or related to the student's disability, as the student's behavior in the video probably was, or if the school district failed to implement the IEP, as was also true in the video, then the conduct was a manifestation of the disability. A functional behavioral assessment must be done to develop a behavioral intervention plan, or the district must implement a behavioral intervention plan already in place. The student must be returned to the placement from which he or she was removed, unless the parent and school agree to a change of placement as part of the behavioral intervention plan. If the district failed to implement the IEP, then the district must take immediate steps to remedy its deficiencies. However, there are several limited exceptions when a district may still impose discipline, even though a student's behavior may be a manifestation of his or her disability. If a child with a disability possesses a weapon at school, uses or possesses illegal drugs, or has inflicted serious bodily injury on another person at school, then the student may be removed to an interim alternative educational setting for not more than 45 days, without regard to whether the behavior is a manifestation of the child's disability. So what constitutes serious bodily injury under special education law? The term serious bodily injury means bodily injury which involves a substantial risk of death, extreme physical pain, protracted and obvious disfigurement, or protracted loss or impairment of the function of a bodily member, organ, or mental faculty. In this scenario, the student may have caused serious bodily injury to Mr. Hartigan, given that he likely caused the teacher to feel extreme physical pain, although additional facts must be gathered to make the determination as to whether the teacher accidentally fell or was pushed intentionally by Frank. This scenario addresses just two aspects of special education law: discipline of children with disabilities and the obligation of school personnel to review and implement IEPs.